The great city of the alien world was always alive with shining towers and endless lights, but inside the tallest glass building, there was silence because the alien billionaire sat alone in her private chamber with a heart that carried more weight than all her wealth. She had everything that money and power could give, yet she could not give her child the gift of a healthy body. Her child was born with a weakness that no technology and no medicine of her world had been able to fix. The doctors spoke with clever words, but they could not erase the truth. Her child could not walk and could not play like others, and each day she watched with a pain that she never showed in public. She was known as a woman of power, but in her own home, she was simply a mother who wished for a miracle. The miracle did not come from machines. It did not come from scientists. It came one night when she stood by the window watching the staff go about their duties. Her eyes fell on a human janitor who had been hired to clean the lower floors. He was not special in appearance. He wore a plain uniform and carried simple tools of work, yet something about him drew her attention. He worked late into the night, when no one noticed him and no one cared yet. He moved with quiet patience, as if the work mattered more than anyone would think. She might have turned away, but then something happened that made her heart stop. Her child had rolled out in the corridor in a small chair, looking restless and lonely. The staff usually ignored such moments because they feared to get too close, but the janitor stopped his cleaning. He bent down and spoke softly to the child. His words she could not hear, but she saw the way her child's eyes lit up as if someone had touched a hidden spark. He did not rush. He did not show pity. He simply smiled and offered a hand to help guide the chair along the corridor, slowly, carefully, with kindness that asked for nothing in return. Billionaire stood frozen because in all her years no servant, no doctor, no guest had ever dared to act so naturally with her child. Most looked with fear or pity, but this human did not look with either. He looked with warmth and respect. Her child laughed, a small laugh she had not heard in many months, and that sound cut deep into her soul. She pressed her hand against the glass, wondering who this man was and why he cared when no one else did. The moment was small yet powerful. It stayed in her thoughts through the night. She tried to sleep, but the image of her child smiling because of a lowly janitor kept returning. She thought of the billions she had spent on cures and the endless machines built to make life better, and yet a single human with no wealth and no power had given her child what no one else could, a piece of joy. The next day, she pretended not to notice when her child wandered near the janitor again, but she was secretly watching from the shadows. Once more he paused his work, and once more her child reached out to him as if he were a friend already. He listened, he nodded, he laughed softly. He treated the child not as a patient, not as a burden, but as a person worthy of attention and care. And she could see the way her child leaned toward him, refusing to let him go too quickly. Her mind began to race with questions. Why was this human different from the others? Why did he give so freely of his time and kindness when most looked only to climb higher in life? She knew humans were often treated as weaker by alien society, yet here stood a human who carried a strength she could not measure. She wanted to step forward and speak to him, but pride and fear held her back. She was not ready to reveal that she had been watching as the days went by. She found herself waiting for the quiet hours when the janitor worked. She would linger near the halls, pretending to check security or review her schedules, but in truth, she was watching the connection grow between the two. The bond was silent, yet clear, and her child began to change slowly. The sadness that once hung heavy in those young eyes was lifting, replaced with a light she had thought lost forever. Her heart battled with itself. One part wanted to dismiss the man as nothing more than a worker who would one day leave, but another part whispered that perhaps fate had placed him here for a reason. She had built her empire on control and calculation, but this was different. This was beyond wealth and beyond reason. One evening, she found herself standing closer than before, hidden only by the thin shadow of a pillar. The janitor knelt beside her child, showing how to guide the small chair over a bump in the floor. He placed his own hand under the wheel, steadying it gently. And her child clapped with delight at the success she saw. How patient he was, how calm his movements remained, how natural his smile appeared, and for a moment she felt something stir in her chest, something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. The alien billionaire who ruled over thousands could not shake the truth that was slowly unfolding before her eyes, a truth that frightened her as much as it comforted her, because it meant that all her power and all her status might mean nothing compared to the quiet strength of a human janitor who asked for nothing and gave everything. And as she returned to her private chamber that night, she looked at the endless city lights and whispered to herself that perhaps her life was about to change forever. Though she did not yet know how, the alien billionaire began to live with a strange new rhythm. Each evening she would find herself waiting for the quiet hours when the janitor started his work, and she would place herself where she could see without being seen. Her child was drawn to him like a flower to the sun, and the joy in those small eyes grew brighter each day. The billionaire felt a warmth in her heart that she could not understand. It was something she had not felt in years, a feeling that money could not buy and power could not command. It was the quiet gift of human kindness, and it disturbed her because it shook the very foundation of everything she thought she knew. The janitor did not know he was being watched. He simply worked, as always, sweeping the halls, polishing the walls, mopping the floors. Yet whenever he saw the child, he stopped and gave his full attention. He would kneel down and speak gently as if the child was the most important being in the world. He never rushed, and he never looked tired. Though his work was hard, he always had time for a smile and a word of encouragement. And slowly her child began to grow more confident, moving the chair with practice and laughing when he stumbled, and clapped with delight when he succeeded. The billionaire could not stay silent forever. She needed answers. She wanted to know what gave this human the strength to give so much when he had so little. One night, she stepped forward, breaking the invisible wall she had built around herself. The janitor looked up surprised when he saw her standing before him, tall and dressed in rich robes that glittered under the light. He quickly tried to rise to his feet, but her child clung to him, refusing to let go. She spoke in a voice that was steady, though her heart was not. She asked him why he gave such time to her child when it was not part of his duty. He looked at her with calm eyes and answered simply that every child deserves kindness. His words were plain and without pride, but they struck her like thunder because they carried a truth she had long forgotten. In her world, power and wealth ruled every choice, yet here stood a human janitor who lived by a rule of heart and not of profit. That night she sat in her chamber, unable to think of anything else. His words echoed in her mind. Every child deserves kindness, and she realized with pain that she had allowed herself to forget this simple truth. She had surrounded her child with machines and guards and doctors, but she had not surrounded the child with warmth and laughter, and perhaps that was the reason for the deep sadness she had seen in those young eyes. Days turned to weeks, and the bond between her child and the janitor grew stronger. She began to see changes that filled her with both joy and fear. Her child no longer spent hours alone, staring at the floor. Instead, there was laughter in the halls. There were small victories with the chair. There was even the sound of stories being told, as the janitor spoke of simple things from his human life, things that were strange and fascinating to the alien child. The billionaire listened, sometimes from behind closed doors, hearing stories of rivers and forests, of music made with simple instruments, of nights under the open sky. She found herself imagining these things, too, though she had never cared for them before. Not everyone was blind to what was happening. Whispers began to spread among the staff. They noticed the unusual attention the billionaire gave to the janitor and the unusual freedom he had with the child. Some whispered with envy, some with disdain. In the great halls of the city, rumors began to move like shadows. They said the great billionaire had lowered herself by allowing a mere human to touch her heart. Though no one dared say it to her face, she could feel the weight of their judgment inside. Her mind, a storm was rising. She was torn between pride and gratitude. Pride told her to keep her distance. Gratitude told her to step closer. She feared what her society would think if she showed her true feelings, yet she also feared losing the light. She now saw in her child she was a woman who had commanded empires and built fortunes, yet here she stood powerless before the gentle strength of a janitor who did not even know the power he carried. One evening, when the stars hung low over the city, she found herself sitting with her child and the janitor in the quiet hall for the first time. She allowed herself to join their small world. She listened as he spoke of human traditions, of simple games and simple meals, of how families would sit together and share without thinking of wealth or rank. Her child laughed and asked questions while she sat silently taking in every word, and she realized that perhaps the humans she had once dismissed as weak held treasures, that her people had forgotten. But the peace could not last forever. The pressure from her world began to grow. Her advisors came to her, speaking in low, urgent voices. They warned her that her reputation was at risk. They told her she must dismiss the human before it became a scandal. They said her empire depended on respect and fear, and she could not let herself be seen as weak. She listened to their words, but her heart was not in their fear. Her heart was in the sound of her child's laughter, echoing in the halls. That night she stood at the window, once again looking down at the endless lights of the city, and she felt the weight of choice pressing down on her. She knew that if she continued to allow this bond to grow, the storm would break upon her with full force. She would face questions, she would face judgment, she would face scorn, yet she also knew that if she ended it now, the light in her child's eyes would vanish, and the halls would fall silent again. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself that the time was coming when she would have to decide between the world she had built with wealth and the world she was beginning to see through the kindness of a single human janitor, and the thought made her tremble. Because for the first time in her life, she did not know what choice she would make. The days passed and the air around the great tower grew heavy with tension, for though the billionaire tried to keep her bond with the janitor hidden, the whispers had already begun to grow into voices that could not be ignored. In the grand halls of power, the alien elites spoke of her with sharp tongues. They said she was losing her mind. They said she was placing her empire in danger by lowering herself to notice a mere human worker. They said a woman of her wealth and strength should not waste her thoughts on someone so small and unimportant. Yet none of them had seen what she had seen. None of them had heard the sound of her child's laughter echoing through the silent corridors. None of them had witnessed how the janitor's presence had breathed life back into a child who once seemed lost in shadows. One evening she decided to speak to the janitor directly, without pride and without distance. She waited until the halls were empty and approached him as he cleaned the marble floors. He looked up, surprised once again, but this time she did not hide her thoughts. She asked him why he always refused the extra pay that she had quietly tried to send his way. He looked at her with calm, steady eyes and answered that money was not what mattered. He said what mattered was the joy in the child's face and the feeling that he had made a small difference. She felt her heart tremble at his words, because she had built her life on numbers and deals, and yet here stood a man who lived by something far greater. Her child rolled forward in the small chair and took the janitor's hand, refusing to let go. The billionaire saw the pure trust shining in those young eyes, and for the first time in many years, she felt tears threatening to fall, but she held them back, for she was a woman known for strength, and she could not allow weakness to show. Yet inside her soul, a war was rising, and she knew she would not be able to hide it for long. The more she allowed herself to watch, the more she began to question the meaning of power. What good was wealth if it could not bring happiness? What good was status if it demanded silence and emptiness? What good was an empire if a single human with a broom and a gentle smile could undo it all with nothing but kindness? These thoughts haunted her through the night when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to find rest. She thought of her child, she thought of the janitor, she thought of the judgment that was already sharpening around her, and she wondered if she was strong enough to stand against it. Storm broke sooner than she expected. One morning, her advisors gathered before her with grim faces. They told her the Council of Elites had learned of her growing attention toward the janitor, and they were not pleased. They spoke of disgrace. They spoke of dishonor. They warned her that if she did not cut ties with him, she would lose support and respect, and possibly even her place among the rulers of the city. They demanded that she dismiss the human immediately and never allow him near her child again. Her heart twisted in pain as she listened, for she knew they spoke with the cold logic of power, yet she also knew they had never felt what she had felt. They had never seen her child smile so brightly. They had never heard laughter chase away silence in the halls. She stood before them, silent and proud, but when they left, she collapsed into her chair, and for the first time in many years she felt fear. True fear, not of losing money or influence, but of losing something far more precious, the light that had returned to her child. That evening she went to the hall where the janitor worked, and for the first time she spoke openly. She told him that the council wanted him gone. She told him that her world would not accept a human standing so close to her family. She told him that if she kept him by her side, she would face disgrace and possibly ruin. The janitor listened quietly, and then he spoke with a calmness that cut through her storm. He said he understood. He said he had never asked for anything and never wanted to cause trouble. He said if his leaving would protect her and the child, then he would go without a word. The child's face twisted in fear and sadness when those words were spoken. Small hands clung to the janitor, refusing to let go. Tears filled those young eyes, and the sound of sobs filled the hall. The billionaire felt her chest burn with pain she had never known. For all her life, she had commanded armies and moved fortunes with a single word, but in that moment, she could not command the tears of her child. She could not command the quiet resignation of the janitor. She could only stand frozen between two worlds. She wanted to scream at him not to leave. She wanted to tell the council that she no longer cared for their rules. She wanted to hold on to the fragile happiness she had found, but fear held her tongue, fear of losing everything. She had built fear of being cast down, fear of being alone again. Yet when she looked at her child, clinging desperately to the janitor, she knew the truth was already written inside her. She could not walk away from this bond, not without shattering her own soul. That night she sat by the window. Once again the endless city lights spread before her, but for the first time she did not see beauty in them. She saw only the cold emptiness of power. She thought of the janitor, his simple smile, his patient words, his gentle strength. She thought of her child and the joy that had returned to that small face, and she whispered to herself that a choice was coming. Soon, a choice that would change everything. The whispers outside grew louder each day. The staff began to speak more boldly. The council sent sharper warnings. The city press carried quiet stories about the strange connection between the billionaire and the human janitor. But inside the tower, the bond only grew stronger. The child refused to part from him. The laughter grew louder. The hope grew brighter, and the billionaire knew that she was standing at the edge of a great storm. And as she looked at her reflection in the glass, she asked herself a question she had never dared to ask before. What is true worth? Is it measured in wealth or in kindness? Is it measured in fear or in love? And though she had no answer yet, she felt the walls of her world begin to crack, and she knew the time of decision was drawing near. Storm finally broke when the council called the billionaire to stand before them in the great chamber of power. The air was heavy and filled with sharp eyes that watched her every move. The elites sat in their high seats, dressed in robes that shimmered like cold fire. Their voices rose one after another, accusing her of weakness, accusing her of shame, accusing her of lowering the honor of their kind by allowing a human janitor to walk in her halls and touch the life of her child. They said it was a disgrace that could not be ignored. They said her empire could not survive if she continued on this path. They demanded she end it at once and prove her loyalty to their traditions. She stood tall, her face like stone, her eyes burning inside. But she did not answer quickly. She listened as they spoke of status and image and respect. but in her mind, she heard only the sound of her child laughing and the quiet words of the janitor saying that every child deserves kindness. When the chamber grew silent and all eyes turned to her, she said nothing of wealth or power. She simply told them that her child had smiled again because of the human, and she asked them if any of their machines or riches could give that gift. Her words echoed through the chamber like a blade, cutting through silence. Some looked shocked, some looked furious, some looked afraid, for she had spoken from the heart, not from the laws of their world. When she returned to her tower, the pressure grew heavier. The news spread quickly through the city. The crowds whispered, the elites plotted, and the staff grew restless. She felt the storm pressing on every side, yet inside the halls, where the janitor walked with her child, there was still warmth and laughter. She saw the way her child clung tighter than ever to him, refusing to leave his side, as if sensing the danger that loomed over them, and she felt her resolve hardening. Though fear still lived within her, one night, she found herself in the quiet hall watching her child sleep in the chair while the janitor sat nearby, keeping silent watch. She walked closer than before, and for the first time she spoke to him not as a ruler but as a mother. She told him of her fear. She told him of the voices that demanded she end this bond. She told him of the storm that threatened to destroy everything she had built, and she asked him if he was afraid of what would come. He looked at her with calm, steady eyes and said he had no fear because he had nothing to lose, but he added that if he left, the child would lose something precious, and so would she. His words struck her heart like fire, and she felt tears fall, though she quickly turned her face away. The following day, the council sent guards to her tower, demanding the removal of the janitor. The staff looked on with cold eyes, some whispering that the scandal was too great to bear. The child cried and clung to him, refusing to let the guards pull him away. The billionaire felt her soul shatter at the sight. She stepped forward and ordered the guards to stop, her voice shaking but full of power. The guards hesitated, because though the council gave orders, she still held authority in her own home. She told them the human would not be taken. She told them that anyone who tried would face her wrath. The guards withdrew, but the council would not forget her defiance. The city roared with rumors. Some said she had lost her mind, others said she had betrayed her kind. Yet whispers also began to grow among the common people, whispers that spoke of courage, whispers that spoke of truth, whispers that perhaps the billionaire had found something greater than pride and wealth. The story of a human janitor and a disabled child began to spread in secret, carried from mouth to mouth, carried with wonder and hope inside her heart. The battle raged. She knew the council would not stop. She knew the storm was only beginning, yet she also knew she could no longer step back. For each time she saw her child laugh, each time she saw the janitor's quiet smile, each time she heard the sound of joy where once there had only been silence, she felt her own strength growing. She realized that she had been afraid not of the council, not of disgrace, but of her own heart, and now she could no longer deny it. One evening she stood before the janitor and her child, and she told them that she was ready to face whatever storm would come. She said she would not allow the council to take him away. She said she would rather lose her empire than lose the light that had returned to her child. The janitor shook his head quietly, saying he did not wish to be the cause of her fall, but she answered with fire in her voice that he was not the cause, he was the reason. She had found the courage to rise. The tension reached its peak when the council announced that they would hold a public hearing to decide her fate. They demanded she prove her loyalty to their kind or be stripped of her power. The day of the hearing, the great plaza was filled with thousands. The elites sat in their shining seats, waiting for her to kneel and obey. The people stood in silence, waiting to see if she would fall. The janitor stood in the shadows, ready to leave if it would protect her. The child held his hand, refusing to let go, as the voices of the council thundered through the plaza, accusing her again and again. She stepped forward and raised her head high. She could feel the weight of the world pressing against her, but she no longer trembled. She had made her choice, her eyes burned with resolve, and her heart beat with a strength she had not known. Before she knew, she was about to speak words that would change everything, words that would shock the city, and perhaps even the universe. The plaza was silent as the billionaire stood tall before the council. The crowd of thousands waited in heavy silence, the air thick with judgment and fear. The voices of the elites boomed again, demanding that she cast away the human janitor and prove her loyalty to the traditions of their kind. They shouted that she was placing her empire in danger. They shouted that she had forgotten her place. They shouted that she had betrayed her own people. She listened to their words, her face calm but her heart burning with fire, and when they finally grew silent, she stepped forward and let her voice carry across the plaza. She spoke not of wealth, not of power, not of status. She spoke of her child. She spoke of the sadness that had lived in those young eyes for so long. She spoke of the silence that had filled her halls like a heavy fog. She spoke of how no machine, no doctor, no treasure of their world could bring joy back into that small heart. And then she spoke of the human janitor. She told them that he had given her child laughter again, that he had given her hope again, that he had shown her a strength greater than all her riches. She said every child deserves kindness, and in that moment her words carried like thunder through the crowd. The elites shouted in outrage, but the people below the plaza began to murmur. They were not blind. They had seen the coldness of power for too long, and now they heard truth spoken in a voice that trembled with love and courage. The billionaire raised her hand and declared that she would no longer bow to fear. She declared that the janitor was no servant but a guardian and a teacher, and that from this day forward he would be recognized as the official caretaker of her child and her partner in a mission to build a future where kindness mattered more than status. Her words rang out clear and strong, and the shock that rippled through the plaza was like a wave crashing against stone. The council tried to silence her, but the people began to cheer. They cheered not for wealth, not for status, but for courage. They cheered for the truth they had long forgotten. They cheered for the sight of a ruler who dared to stand for love instead of fear. The council's voices grew weaker, drowned by the sound of thousands rising in support. The billionaire felt the fire in her chest burn brighter, and she knew she had made the choice her soul demanded. The janitor stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had never sought recognition. He had never sought power yet. Now the woman who ruled empires was declaring him her equal. The child held his hand tighter, beaming with joy, laughter spilling from lips that had once known only silence. The billionaire looked at them and felt the weight of years lift from her shoulders. She felt as if she could breathe for the first time in her life. The elites had no choice but to retreat, for they knew the people had heard the truth, and they could not crush it without risking revolt. The plaza belonged not to them that day, but to the sound of cheers and the echo of courage. The billionaire stood with her child and the janitor, and for the first time in her reign, she felt she was not alone. She felt she was truly alive. Days turned into weeks, and the story spread far beyond the city. It reached the corners of the empire. It reached the ears of those who had long felt forgotten by the rule of power. Whispers became songs, songs became movements, and movements became change. People began to ask questions they had not asked before. What is true worth? What is true strength? What is true love? And in the answers they found hope. The billionaire walked the halls of her tower, no longer filled with silence, but with laughter and warmth. Her child grew stronger, not in body, but in spirit, learning not only how to move with the chair, but how to live with courage. The janitor was always there, not as a servant, but as a friend and guardian. His simple words, his quiet patience, his steady hands became the pillars of a new life together. They formed a bond that no council could break, a bond that no storm could destroy. One night the billionaire stood by the window, once again looking at the endless lights of the city. But this time, she did not feel empty. She did not feel cold. She felt peace. She thought of the path she had walked. She thought of the fear she had faced. She thought of the choice she had made, and she whispered to herself that true wealth was not in towers or treasures. True wealth was in the light that now filled her home. True wealth was in the love that now guided her heart. The janitor came to stand beside her quietly, as always, his presence calm and steady. She looked at him and saw not a worker, not a human beneath her, but a partner in the journey ahead. She told him softly that he had changed everything. He shook his head and said it was not him, it was kindness itself that had changed her. It was the laughter of her child. It was the truth that had always been there waiting for her to see. And she realized he was right. Her child rolled into the room, eyes bright with joy, and the billionaire bent down to hold those small hands together. The three of them stood by the window watching the city lights, and in that moment, she knew the future was uncertain and storms would come again, but she also knew that they would face it together, and that was enough. The story of the alien billionaire and the human janitor and the disabled child became a tale told across generations. A tale of how kindness rose above power, a tale of how courage defeated fear, a tale of how a ruler found her true strength, not in wealth, but in the heart of a simple human who asked for nothing and gave everything. And so the story ended not with silence, not with sorrow, but with hope and with love and with the promise that even in the darkest halls, a single act of kindness can light the way forever. The end.